Our next presenter is KristinaLee, who is a third-year PhD student in communication studies. Kristina knew they wanted to study theist normativity when they started being treated differently after opening up about being an atheist. Their presentation title is In God We Trust, Theistic Normative Legislation in the United States.
A 2014 study found that 69% of respondents think that people need to believe in God to be truly American. The statistic is particularly concerning when one considers that research has found that more than 20% of US Americans might actually be atheistic, but that many of these people choose to hide their atheist identities in most public situations. Why is it that in a society that's supposed to have religious freedom, we consider theism to be associated with Americanism, and atheists choose to hide their identity? This is the question that drives much of my scholarship. And I argue that one of the key factors is the prevalence of theist normative legislation in our society. Theist normative legislation are official policies, rituals, and symbols that encourage people to view themselves as a theistic collective. Some of the most prominent examples of theist normative legislation include the phrase under God in the Pledge of Allegiance and the national motto In God We Trust. I use rhetorical analysis to try to understand how people argue to add this theist normative legislation and what the function of such legislation is. And I argue that one of the key functions is to frame atheists as un-American and to silence them ultimately. For example, during the Civil War, when In God We Trust was first put on money, there was a fear that people would think the United States was a heathen nation if government did not officially recognize God on money. In 1908, Congress reinforced this phrase on money and said that we need to have it because our goal should be to stamp out infidelity from this country, infidelity being a common term for atheists at the time. Now, during the 1950s, we saw a massive increase in theist normative legislation, which was a part of the Cold War propaganda that was heavily anti-atheistic. For example, in arguing for why Under God is a constitutional addition to the Pledge of Allegiance, Congressmember Louis Rabeau argued that an atheist American is a contradiction of terms, thus it doesn't matter if they cannot say the pledge. Just a couple of years later, a similar argument was used to justify making In God We Trust our national motto. Now, it's notable that atheists are in a double bind when it comes to theist normative legislation. Either they can accept such legislation, and in doing so, they accept legislation that was justified by framing them as un-American, or they can challenge such legislation, and in doing so, they're oftentimes framed as being anti-American. So no matter what atheists choose to do, it's difficult for them to escape their un-Americanism. Now, I'm an American atheist, and I don't think of myself as a contradiction of terms, but my scholarship helps me understand why I'm sometimes made to feel like I am. My hope is that my scholarship will help us come together to think about how some of the dominant narratives in our society silence atheists and what we can do to promote religious freedom for all Americans, even atheists. Thank you.